Greetings, fellow Earthlings, and welcome to this tiny garage.
50 weeks ago, I bought this Porsche 911 pre-broken on Craigslist. I've never driven it, I'm not a mechanic, but I've always loved cars and I wanted an excuse to figure out what all the bits are called and how they all work together. And with these videos, I was hoping to at least remind myself how everything went back together. And if I was lucky, that I might get some help from you folks. And really, this has turned into a team effort. Thank you so much to everybody that has helped get this project to this point. Now, for those of you that have been following along, this week is kind of like episode 11 backwards.
In keeping with the whole episode 11 backwards thing, power steering lines should be next. But are they really? This sort of shows that putting the engine back together is not exactly the same as taking it apart. That wiring bracket probably should have gone on after this power steering line, but it is technically possible. Here's the other power steering line, another little hiccup if I was doing this again. That clip for the wiring has to come off really to be able to get that guy on properly. Next then, the power steering stand. There it is. We do have to take out the oil filler tube. They share a hole with each other. I installed the oil filler tube a little early just to make sure that huge hole into the center of the engine was covered. The oil filler tube is held on with one 10mm, which I'm not really torquing, it's just snug. 23 Newton meters is the magic number for these 4 13mm that hold the power steering pump stand in place. There is one bolt in each corner, as you might expect. In the back corner here, you can see what the dealio is. That 10mm is from the oil filler tube. And then finishing up with the final 13mm into the rear corner of the engine stand, and it's done. Much easier than getting that thing off.
Now that I've actually finished putting this engine together, I have noticed some torque trends, specifically that the torque rating goes up as the diameter of the bolt increases. Now this won't work every time, but if you can't find a number, then this is a pretty good ready reckoner to get you in the ballpark. So first of all, these bolts, these 10mm bolts are very common, but they have a 6mm shaft on them, they're M6s, and these are very often 10 Newton meters. Now, a very common bolt as well on this engine and on the chassis of the car too is a 13mm bolt, which actually has an 8mm diameter shaft on it. It's an M8, and those are commonly torqued to 23 Newton meters. And then the next bigger one, which is very common also, has a 15mm head on it, and it's an M10, and those go to 45 Newton meters. So that should get you out of trouble a little bit, and that's the Torquey Tip.
Hold on, what's the dog doing? Oh yeah, subscribe now. Delta says thank you.
Have you ever desired a cool looking American muscle car as it burbles towards you, only to quickly change your mind as soon as you smell it drive past you? Now thankfully that smell is a thing of the past, and we can thank modern emission systems for that. And the Air Oil Separator, or the AOS to the cool kids, is part of that system. Now this is the old AOS from this car, and this little bugger did confuse me for a bit because there are so many pipes and so much folklore surrounding it that it took me a while to realize that really it's just a funnel. And so bear with me here, we're going to ignore this part for now. But as we spoke about in the blueprinting episode, we have blow-by gases getting into the crankcase, and of course the boiling oil that's there as well. And so you've got this oily vapor that needs to go somewhere. And so what happens then is the oily vapor from bank 1 just comes straight up in here into the AOS. And then right here is where the lower vent pipe comes across from bank 2, and then its oily vapor gets deposited in through this port. And then really the oil takes that path of least resistance, hopefully that's the plan, and it comes down here and goes blah, 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 back into the crankcase, into the sump, and that's it. And that is supposed to really be it. But of course there is a little bit of extra complication on top of that. Now we have this diaphragm on the top, and that's there to regulate how much suction is put on those vapors. And so the problem that can happen with these is if the diaphragm gets worn, it starts to suck more than it should and can end up pulling in some of that oil into the intake, and you'll see it as blue smoke coming out of the exhaust after the engine has started. Like it won't stop having the blue smoke issue. And if it gets bad enough, it'll suck up so much oil that it will hydrolock your engine, and that's bad. You want to look that up. Anyway, so the other thing that confused me on this was these other pipes, and those are the water pipes. So this one is the in that comes from that coolant breather hose on the front of the engine by the alternator, and so that goes through the diaphragm, and I'm not sure what role the water pressure plays, if any, in what's going on here, but the word on the street is that that water is just to cool the diaphragm from the whole boiling oil issue that it's dealing with. And then this pipe here goes back to the triple hose, which really just puts it back into the cooling system by the evaporation tank. And so that's it. That's the air oil separator. There are improvements out there. You should treat it like a wear item, like a water pump. But I spoke to like Lee Jenkins at Hartech and Roberto at TuneRS Motorsports, and they said that, yeah, for a street car, the regular Porsche unit is totally cool, but there is the Porsche Motorsports version, which you can use if you plan on racing or just, want the best of the best. And then there's also the Ultimate AOS system out there, which one of the things that system does is takes this diaphragm and moves it closer to the front of the engine, so it's easier to get at and easier to replace. So there we go. That is the AOS system, a glorified funnel.
The infamous air oil separator. Bring in the GIMP. So removing our tape, again, orifice protection, using some white lithium grease on that part there, which is what returns the oil back into the sump. This concertina section here, I think you're supposed to put it on like that, using this Craftsman hose clip tool, but oh my gosh, it was not working. The rubber kept buckling on one side and I couldn't get it to slip down the pipe evenly. I then decided to put that part on separate to the AOS unit. That resulted in success with much less hassle. Putting in two 10mm bolts, which is really all that holds the air oil separator in place. Putting those clips back together, and then vent pipe there, the lower vent pipe, is bringing those vapors across from bank 2. Now that's the old one there. I put it on just to sort of practice because it's a little fiddly, and you'll see what I mean. You want to put in the bank 2 side first. I did move the dipstick there as well, and that made it all possible. So there's the vent pipe connecting to the connection piece. I was told if you take the connection piece off and then click it onto the pipe, it's easier. It was. Along its journey back to the AOS, the lower vent pipe has 3 plastic clips attached to it. They hold the vent pipe, the wiring harness, and the B Junction Box cable. We just need to finagle the oil feed for our IMS out of the way, and then connect that lower vent pipe to the air oil separator. Alright, that's everything below the wiring harness. Here it is. Those 2 round connectors connect to the car. They start on the bank 2 side. That's everything for bank 2. There's the air temperature sensor. That's the stuff that goes in the corner of bank 2, the cam stuff. Then that's going across the top of the engine, knock sensors and things. And then we're at the other side. That's all bank 1. Here we go. We're going to lay the harness just in general on top, and you see what I mean. That's all bank 1 over there, so just sort of fling it on that side. And it follows that upper vent pipe, thankfully, and it goes onto the larger of the clips that are available there. And you can see it retained its shape. That's for the coolant temperature sensor. I know where that's going to go. Now, I am following pictures of my own videos. I'm so glad I made them. That was the original reason, was so as I would know how to put this back together. And then really just following the clues between the photographs and what the harness is telling me itself. I did label them all. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. I had to turn the bank 2 knock sensor a little bit to be able to connect it, and I made a list. Everything in blue there is things that should get connected, and I'm knocking them off the list as I do them. Those connectors there are for the smog pump valve and then the alternator. Those are all the corner pieces for the cams and crankshaft sensors on bank 1. Here they are there. We're going to put them more or less in place. Bit of a puzzle, just sort of figuring out logically where they should go, and that was the answer to the puzzle. Cam sensors, crank sensors, and the Vario cam plug, plus a grounding wire as well. Now we can put the end of the wiring harness in place, which really is injector and coil plugs. And it's fairly obvious which one's which because they're all predetermined lengths, you know. Everything goes on the inside of the fuel rail. So I'm doing cylinder 2 there, injector and coil plug. Finally, cylinder 1. And then those clips that we had to wait a month for are holding just the top of that wiring harness in place. Okay, now we can plug in that solenoid valve for the smog pump. We're going to work our way back towards where the wiring harness comes in. Next in line then is the starter motor, something I'd heard of. That's the small wire for that one. This small nut only requires 6.5 Newton meters, which is lower than I can set the alarm on this torque wrench, though it does start telling you what's going on once you get to 5 Newton meters and above. Next in line then is the oil level and temperature sensor, that super long sensor that goes all the way into the sump. Now we are over on bank 2, and same as bank 1, mostly injectors and coil plugs. Specific to bank 2, we're also going to find the engine bay temperature sensor that clips onto the bank 2 plastic intake manifold, plus the oil pressure sensor that just has one big and one small connector. You'd have to really try very hard to connect that the wrong way. The bank 2 corner doesn't have a crankshaft sensor, just the Vario cam and the cam sensor plus a ground, and then the coolant temperature sensor there. We need to encourage this connector for the air conditioning compressor to lay down so it could be zip tied in place. Now we're ready for the B junction box. This really it's a big thick wire that takes the heavy lifting for the starter motor and the alternator. Connecting the starter motor first there. That larger 13mm nut on the starter motor is torqued to 15 Newton meters. The B junction box there has a couple of 10 mils. I'm just putting them on tight but not torquing them. We need an alternator to help power all this stuff. That's the main connector, and then there's the plug for it. There's the alternator itself, just kind of gently putting it in place. It's very heavy. Then putting the lower bolt in first, and then whacking it over so that I can get the other bolt that has the pulley on it. 45 Newton meters on those 15 mils. And that's it. In the back, that has that one plug at the bottom, which was a little fiddly. I had to push the lower vent pipe out of the way. And then in the top is just that main connector. It's a 13 mil, 15 Newton meters. That's the alternator done. The power steering pump was a pain to get out originally because of that little bump I know now. And so a rotating motion is the way to get it in. It's still not graceful, but I did get it to work in the end. I did undo one of the lower vent pipe clips to help me get access to that rear pipe, which just plugs in at the back. I covered up the orifice. Again, I'm afraid of things falling in my orifices. Then I'm tightening up that front pipe just a little bit for now. There are then three 13mm in the front of this stand, tightened to 23 Newton meters. And then same dealio in the back, just a single shorter 13mm. We need to tighten this power steering pipe using a crow's foot. That's fine, but how do you know how much you're supposed to torque it? Well, thanks to these awesome subscribers, I now know that if you just turn the crow's foot at 90 degrees, you're going to be pretty close to the real value. For situations where you can't turn the crow's foot 90 degrees, subscriber Bernard McLake sent us this formula. After running my numbers through that formula, I learned that this crow's foot is providing the torque wrench with a 6% advantage. Therefore, I reduced my torque setting to 21.6 Newton meters. Thank you, Bernard.
Hit the notification bell. It's up there.
Yes, please. Intake manifold. That means we're getting close to the end. All right, here we can take out the kitchen paper because our orifices are going to be finally closed. Here is the intake manifold for bank 1. It has that grey switchover valve on it for the vacuum system. All 6 green O-rings in those intake manifolds were replaced from the kit we got in episode 24. This is the center intake distributor with a flapper valve that runs off the vacuum system. That's what that changeover valve on bank 1 connects to. The last piece of the intake manifold puzzle is the front intake distributor. Those 4 greenish bolts are for attaching the throttle body. On the top left of that intake distributor, you can see where the upper vent pipe returns the vapors from the air oil separator to get burned alive in the engine one more time. We can now connect that changeover valve to the wiring harness. It was the final plug on that harness on the bank 1 side. And then the vacuum hose for the one-way check valve connects to that. And then that hose goes to the center intake and runs the flapper valve. Moving over to the bank 2 intake, we may as well bolt on the B Junction Box bracket now, because it's going to be staying. And then this vacuum line from the front distributor goes to the fuel pressure regulator. And here we are going to attach the coolant breather hose. That is what supplies water to the air oil separator. Then this little one-way check valve plugs into the front intake distributor.
I would like if you would hit the like button.
All right, we're ready for the throttle body. Interestingly enough, you can see this is one of the E-Gas throttle bodies, a fly-by-wire. Right, the power steering pump and everything is in. We can put the pulley on. A little bit of violence to encourage it. Some 13mm on the front of that. Now this is the old belt, I promise. I don't have any flywheel or anything to hold the engine with, so I'm using that with a vice grip to be able to torque those 13mm to 23 Newton meters. Once all the intake gubbins seem to be in the correct location, I loosely threaded all of the intake bolts into position before tightening them down to 10 Newton meters. 6 more of those 10mm on bank 2, and that's it. With the intake installed, it's time for the upper vent pipe and its friends. That connects to the coolant breather hose, and you need a 6mm socket to tighten that hose clamp. That upper vent pipe then clips onto the front intake distributor. In the back, on the air oil separator itself, that coolant breather hose is what provides water to the diaphragm of the AOS. We can then clip the other end of the upper vent pipe onto the AOS. That hose clamp is also a 6mm. And wrapping things up a little bit here, now that everything does seem to be in the right place, I'm going to tighten these hose clamps on the intake distributors. The one in the back I'm going to tighten sort of finally, that probably won't need to move. The one in the front I would like to be able to move a little bit, so I'm leaving those 7mm slightly loose to give me a bit of wiggle room.
Well, certainly a lot shinier than it was when it came out. I'm hoping it is substantially more functional, and we're going to find that out pretty soon here. I really appreciate all the help from everybody. We're still not quite there yet. We put all the bits and pieces on top, which was our most recent mission. And so next we have to put all the transmission stuff together, put the transmission on, put the engine in, and then drive the car. Thanks very much, everybody. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time.
Kukla Barbie, kukla. Aya Barbie girl.